Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How's everyone doing? Jazakumullah khair, everyone who decided to come out in this freezing cold. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your families and give you goodness in this life and the next. So Imam Muhammad is perhaps busy right now. He's not here. He's not coming? Okay. So Imam Muhammad's not coming. So we'll skip our usual Quran recitation because I wouldn't punish you all with my recitation. And we'll start, inshaAllah, with sort of explaining what we went over today in the khutbah. Was anyone here today for the khutbah? Allahu Akbar. So today in the khutbah, I was realistically taking directly from Imam al-Ghazali. And Imam al-Ghazali, in his book Ihya Ulumuddin, I sort of took what he said and modernized it and contextualized it for us in our time. But in the book is a big book. It's literally big in its size. It's 4 volumes, perhaps 10 volumes. And the actual size of the book is big too. But in the last 4th of the book, he has a chapter on Muhasaba, which is taking ourselves into account. And this I thought was incredibly pertinent to us in our situation today, particularly with the end of the year. Everyone's talking about New Year's resolutions. And the fact that the reality is we need to really just take ourselves into account. We have to ask ourselves, how are we doing, and hold ourselves accountable to those things. So Imam al-Ghazali, he starts off by saying the first chapter of, or the first level of holding ourselves into account, muhasaba, is musharata, which is sort of putting conditions on things. And he starts off by using the simile that I used today, the comparison that I used today of a business person and what you're actually trying to do in transactions. So he said, know that everyone who's doing any type of transaction is realistically trying to get some profit from their transaction. That when you're doing a transaction, that they're trying to get a profit from that. And the profit is, and also when you're trying to get a profit, you're relying on the people who are your partners in this labor. And he says that this is just like this is the intellect, the aql. He says your intellect is a business person and they're on their way to the next life. And what they're trying to achieve from this is tazkiyat an-nafs, purifying your soul. So we're on a path to try to get to the next life, and the goal in that is to purify our soul. And this is because, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That indeed the person who purifies it, meaning the soul, it has success, and the one who doesn't purify themselves is wretched. And then Imam Ghazali continues on to saying, and this is all done, any type of purification of your soul is only achieved via righteous actions. So by acting righteously, both having the knowledge of the things and doing the actual actions, so both being intellectually, spiritually trying to right yourself, then this is how you can acquire the tazkiyat an-nafs, or the purification of our own selves. And he says that the intellect, it relies on the soul in this business transaction. And you can use it for goodness. And mashallah, Imam Ghazali, in this, he only focused on the good side. He said, so the intellect relies on the soul and uses it to purify himself. So we have to intellectually think about something, and then we have to, by doing the good deeds, we use the intellect to purify our soul in this transaction. And this is the sign that you've actually achieved success, Imam Ghazali said. This is the Ratsmal, this is the achievement of success. And he said, this is just like a business partner, that they go as partners in the business. They both have a portion in the business transaction. And they're both in the business transaction being very, very careful as to achieving the profit that they're trying to get. And this is required by, first and foremost, putting conditions on how they're both going to function in their transaction. Both the businessman and his partner. So in our situation, our intellect and our soul. In this business transaction, they have to put conditions into how they're going to live and deal with each other. And this obviously is done by the morals and ethics that our religion puts down for us, and making sure the two are in line with how they're going to do things. And Imam al-Ghazali, he says this comes first by putting conditions. Secondly, it comes with muraqabah, by following or paying close attention to how something is doing, watching over it while it's going on. And this, inshallah, we'll talk about next week in the khutbah and the halaqa bidnillah. So the first step is by putting conditions. The second type is by supervising, to watch over how things are going. The third thing is, after the thing is done, you take it into account. You try to figure out what is going on and what is the product of this transaction. And the fourth and final thing from that is that you see the fruits of your labor, and either it's successful or it's unsuccessful. So either yu'aqibuhu or yu'atibuhu. Either you're going to hold it accountable in a negative light, or you're going to reward it for the things that it's done. So these are the 4 steps that we have to take with regards to our relationship between our intellect and our soul, between our minds and our hearts. The first is by putting conditions. You have to lay the framework. What is it actually that you're going to hold yourself to? What is the morals and ethics that you're trying to live in your life? The second thing is to actually, while you're doing it, try to be mindful of the things you're doing. And this is much more difficult than the third condition, or the third step, which is to, after it's done, hold yourself accountable. Holding yourself accountable while you're actually doing something requires a higher level of mindfulness, a higher level of presence in what you're doing. But the third thing is holding yourself accountable for it afterwards. Seeing how you did, how do the books look, and what can you do to improve on it. And based on that review, based on the audit that you've done of your own deeds, is what either you can reward yourself and to try to do more, you can use it as a means of motivation, or you can hold yourself accountable in a negative light to use that as a means of growth. So Imam al-Ghazali continues on to saying that this is our means of falah. This is truly our means of success. And this is required by following the guidance in the Quran and the Sunnah. This is by following the guidance that we have in both the Quran and the Sunnah. And we have to put conditions on our soul just like we put conditions on our minds. We have to make sure that our soul, what we are using to distinguish between what is good and what is wrong, and the things that we're naturally inclined to, we love or we hate, are all using the same metric, which is correct from our religion. And then he says the next thing is that you do not fall weak, you do not become haphazard, or do not become forgetful of this thing, not even for a second. You do not have ghafla or negligence of what's going on, of your soul, of your heart, not even for a lahza, not even for a second, a blink of an eye. He said, because this is the most important thing for you to do, to be present with your soul and your mind, and to be negligent of what is going on, to be negligent of how you're actually doing, is the biggest form of khiyana, the biggest form of trickery that you're having for yourself. To think that to not hold yourself accountable, you're really only fooling yourself. And you're taking away and wasting the biggest, your capital in this business transaction. You're wasting the actual fuel that you will use to get yourself into either the goodness in the next life or this life, or this life or the next. And the reward, the true profit for all of this is much better than any worldly profit we could have. The reward for this is al-firdaus, the highest level of Jannah. So the reward for this entire transaction of purifying our soul is achieving the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then being rewarded with the highest level of Jannah. And he says we have to be very specific and very critical in our hisab, in our audits, in our reckoning of our own selves. If we're realizing that this is what we can get from it, we have to be very daqiq, very critical of ourselves in how we're holding ourselves to account, and specifically our soul, because this is the biggest thing for us. And then he goes on to mention something that is very, very beautiful. I actually put it on Facebook. He said, "La khayra fi khayri la yadum." There's no good in goodness that is not continuous. Bal shar, rather it's evil. If there's goodness that does not continue forever, then in reality that's not goodness. He says, "Bal shar la yadum khayru min khayr la yadum." Rather, evil, something that's wretched, that is not continuous, is better than goodness that stops. Again, I'll explain it. There's no goodness in good that is not continuous, everlasting. Rather, a form of transgression or a form of evilness that does not continue on forever is better than goodness that does not continue on forever. And then he explains it. He said, why? Because if you have some form of good that is not everlasting, it will come to an end, then you obviously will miss it. You'll feel sad. You'll feel regret for that goodness that went. But something that's evil that will eventually come to an end, he mentions everyone is happy when goodness comes once again. And this, what he's talking about is Jannah. This is everlasting goodness. Paradise is everlasting goodness. And our worldly life is only temporary. So by sacrificing everlasting goodness for temporary goodness, in reality is counterintuitive. In reality is nonsensical. But rather having some evil, some difficulty, something that's difficult that eventually is going to come to an end is much better, if it's for a good thing, is much better than that goodness that only is short-term lived. So he continues on, rahimahullah, Imam Ghazali, by mentioning that so the next part that I mentioned, and I'm skipping over a few paragraphs, the next part that I mentioned in the khutbah was the shareholders. I said first we have a business that we're working on, and then you have partners in the business, and then you have shareholders in the business. As Imam al-Ghazali mentions, the business is our mind, the intellect is the partner in that, and the shareholders are your limbs. So you in this trying to achieve goodness, the shareholders, the people that will help you in that, are the 7 limbs. And he mentions, obviously we don't have 7 limbs, but he mentions 7 things: the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the stomach, the 2 private parts, your hands, and your feet. And he said this is because we use them to do the goodness, the service that we're trying to do. We use our limbs to serve everything else in this business transaction. We use them to achieve some sort of goodness. And he said, and that is because it's impossible to reap the fruits of our transaction without any actions. And this is just like many of our scholars have mentioned before, that yes, belief is complete, or our iman is complete by believing in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. But to truly ascend in levels and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is going to be determined by our actions. How high we get in closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is purely dictated on our actions. And he mentioned something, that the hellfire also has 7 doors. Hell has 7 doors, and each door will call upon by one of these limbs if we don't use them for proper means. And so we have to use these limbs to help get to Jannah. We have to use these limbs so that we do not disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we advise them, we try to use them and preserve them from wretched deeds. He says, as for the eyes, then we preserve them at looking impermissible things. We preserve our eyes by lowering our gaze, whether it be the opposite gender or a gender that we're inclined toward. We lower our gaze from looking at wretched things that is going to affect us, because we believe in our spiritual paradigm that the things we look at also affect our soul. They also affect our spirituality. And even by modern science, if you look at something for a long time, you eventually become numb to it. If you're constantly, our children today play video games, first-person shooters, they kill people in these games. So now when they see these horrid things happening, they're numb to them. It doesn't affect them as much. The same thing goes to our souls. If we're constantly looking at things that are in disobedience to Allah, in disobedience to God, then it's going to have an effect similarly on our soul. And now what we deem to be correct or incorrect. An example of this is that it was a story of one of the companions who, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or perhaps it was in the time of the Khulafa, I forget exactly where it was, but this righteous man one day was going, and the wind blew. Their doors were very different then, and so it was just a curtain in front of the door. So as he was walking, he saw the wind blow as a woman was changing her clothes, and the man went crazy. He went to be a hermit up on a mountain somewhere, because his soul was much different than how ours is today. If women are to see a man working out with his muscles on in the grocery store, it's not going to affect you anything. If guys are seeing Sports Illustrated magazine, it's not going to affect anything, because we've become numb to these things. When this is from our fitrah to cover up, it's from our natural inclination to cover up our bodies and not want other people to see them. So this is just a small example of how you become numb to the things we're naturally inclined to. As soon as kids, small children, find out they can't show their private part, they don't want anyone else to see it. My 4-year-old says, "Baba, shut the door, I'm using the bathroom." Because it's from our nature. But by constantly seeing things that are not in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, is going to help our soul, we become numb to them. So Imam Ghazali says the first thing is preserving our eyesight on impermissible things. He doesn't start by mentioning things that are disliked, by impermissible things, whether it be from people's private parts, the opposite gender, or the same gender. But this is the first thing. And then he mentions the tongue. By preserving our tongue from saying anything that is impermissible. And by preserving our tongue from saying things that are going to be hurtful to other people. This is the first step. We first have to start with the fundamental things. If you've noticed, I never talk about any of the extra stuff. We're not talking about praying sunnah. We're not talking about doing extra deeds. We need to just do the base things. Are we cursing people in our day-to-day lives? That person cuts us off and we curse them out. Is that how we're living? And we really have to ask ourselves. Because yes, they just cut us off, we curse them as a reflex, but are we training ourselves to this to be our reflex? We're opposed to people who I've actually been in the car with, when someone cuts them off, they make dua for them. May Allah guide you. May Allah forgive you for doing that. How beautiful. When you've trained your reflex to be a prayer for someone else. Something good, you're making dua. The angels are saying that Ameen the same to you. So this is what we're supposed to try to now get our tongue in the habit of saying good things and preserving it from impermissible things. And likewise, something I missed out from your eyes, watching transgression, watching people do things that are wrong. We need to preserve our eyes from those things and make sure that we're not just being a bystander when these things are happening. If we don't have any control over that, something different, but try our best to have some type of control in that. And then our stomachs, which I found to be very, very interesting, mentioned by Imam Ghazali. He said we have to preserve our stomachs. And he mentions in the beginning of the book a lot about how our food intake, what we're eating, affects us both from a physiological level and also on a spiritual level. And in a very practical way, if we're eating haram things, pork, we're drinking alcohol, then in drinking alcohol, we're intoxicated and our prayer is not accepted. When we're eating pork, We know this to be impermissible. So the nutrients that we get from that, is it going to be something that's beneficial spiritually for us? Likewise, if our money is impermissible and we're eating food that we bought by impermissible means, what does that say now about the food that we're eating? And also, how are we taking care of ourselves? Our stomachs. Are we putting in food that's going to give us proper energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to carry about our day and fulfill our obligations? Or are we eating just enough to get by? And perhaps are we not eating? Are we hurting ourselves by not eating? These are all very, very real things that affect us both on a spiritual level and on a physical level. And I'm not preaching to anyone here because I need to worry about what I eat just as much as anyone else. And Imam al-Ghazali, he continues on to say that all the other limbs are just like that. We have to make sure that our limbs are not falling into impermissible things and that we preserve them, making sure that we're taking ourselves into account. And he concludes this section by saying, mentioning the statement of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, where he said, "Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tahasibu." And he says, hold yourself to account before you're taken into account. And then he says, and weigh them before they're weighed. And this is talking about our deeds. We all know we will one day meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we will be asked about every single thing we said and every single thing that we did. But in more depth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask us about everything we thought about, everything we looked at, everything we wanted to do or we wanted to do but couldn't do. As we know from the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, for leaving off doing something that was impermissible, by abstaining from an impermissible thing, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a means of reward. Allah will reward us for that. Just by staying away, I wanted to perhaps drink something that I shouldn't have drank. But because I stayed away from it, Allah will reward me from it. Because I wanted to look at something impermissible. I wanted to take that second look. Or I wanted to look with more detail. By abstaining for Allah's sake, by remembering God, you'll be rewarded for that. And likewise, goodness that you intended, you wanted to do it, but weren't able to, you get rewarded for as well. And this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. But we have to make sure, as Umar al-Khattab says, we take ourselves into account before we're taken into account. So with that, I'm going to close and open the floor to questions, inshallah. So, when I first got here, I don't know, about 8 months ago or something, we did something called SMART goals. Specific, measured, attainable, realistic, time-bound goals. And you set these things so that you can actually have productive goals that achieve something. We did it as a community. What are some things we can also use these same goals that follow the same acronym, but use it for our spirituality? We have so many tools at our hand to do these things from a worldly perspective. Businesses are doing them. People are doing them in their own lives. Life coaches are doing them. What about in our spiritual lives? Why can't we use them? Having a very specific goal. A brother, he came to me 2 days ago or yesterday and said, "Imam, I want to memorize Quran." Older brother with gray in his beard. He said, "I used to work 6 days a week. I'm not going to work on the weekend just so that I can focus on memorizing Quran." I said, "MashaAllah, that's awesome." He said, "But I hardly know how to read. I know a little bit, but my reading's really off. What can I do?" I said, "You can join Imam Muhammad Nabil's Quran class." He said, "But I want to do a juz every single month." I said, "Whoa, what's your memorization capability? How much you've been memorizing the previous months? Is that attainable? Is that realistic?" I can't answer that. It's not for me, is it for you? If your memory is very strong, you're used to doing that, alhamdulillah. That's an attainable and realistic goal. But if not, perhaps you should make the time a little bit bigger. Same thing for us. Perhaps I was speaking to some people in our Wednesday class, Living Islam, and they were saying they want to train themselves to get up, and the first thing they do is they make the dua. The first thing they do, they make the supplication. Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'dama amatana wa ilayhi nushur. Alhamdulillah, all praise due to God, the one who gave us life after we were dead, meaning sleep, and to him we shall return. So it was, okay, how do we do this? How do you train yourself? The first thing you say when you wake up is that. So someone said, put on my alarm, the definition will say like, make dua. Or maybe put a sign on your wall. Or one sister said she has her friend text her every morning around Fajr time. Hey, don't forget to make dua, don't forget to make adhkar. This is how spiritually you can do these things. You want to pray witr before you go to sleep. So what are some things that we can do in our own lives? And you don't have to mention yourself, but these can be hypothetical things that we can do on a very practical level to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because realistically, we have to. We have to be balanced as people. We have to not only strive to be successful in our careers, in our families, want to be good husbands, good wives, good fathers, good mothers, good children. But we also have to try to be good Muslims. People that are trying to be earning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. And if that is your goal, you're trying to attain God's pleasure, then don't you think that's going to trickle into everything else in your life? By being neglectful of one, then you're really not being balanced in things. So what are some practical small things that we can do on an individual level or communally to, one, either hold ourselves to account or to set goals to work forward in the future? Because inshallah, perhaps by giving an idea, someone else can go home and do it and you get rewarded for it. And then maybe I'll cheat because I told you to give them the idea, so I get some reward too. Yeah, I don't think your mic's on though. So her question was, as humans, we're naturally easy on ourselves, and we can be much more critical of other people than we tend to be of ourselves. And what are some practical ways to have some forbearance and to have perseverance through the difficult times and also hold ourselves to account on a practical level? So I'm with you, that's completely true, but I think the real issue is the fact that we're looking at other people. That's something we really, and that's part of our culture. That's not like that's not you, that's culturally we're trained to look at what they're wearing, what they're driving, where they live, what they've achieved. You've got this on your resume, I don't have that. And then after we look at it, now it's either I feel good about myself, I don't feel good about myself, or perhaps worse, I look negatively about you based on those things that you have. I'm hating, for lack of better words. I'm jealous because you have things that I don't. And this is really like the foundation of all these problems. We really have to try to train ourselves to be focused on what am I doing? What am I doing in this situation? Perhaps it's what someone else is, what do I need to do more? If it's something that the best type of jealousy is a jealousy that not only do you not want the person you want that thing, but you also want the person to have it as well. That's good. I want you to have an amazing job. I want an amazing job too. So we're both going to be benefiting here. I'm praying for you and praying for me. But now what do I have to do to achieve those things? What are the practical steps that I'm taking to get those things? So one, the first thing is turning the way you're looking at things and hold yourself to account. So I say Muhammad. I had something that I forgot it. It's not easy though. It's from our nature. Imam Ghazali mentions it. It's from our nature to be weak and to be inclined to things that are easy, not weak. But to be inclined to easiness. And he mentions it. He actually says that we have to be tough on ourselves and not be lazy. No. But anyways, he says that we have to be tough on ourselves, and obviously he's speaking on a utopian level. So he actually says, like, don't waste your time. Don't do things that are just to relax. Those are his exact words. Don't take breaks. Don't relax. And I was thinking to myself, like, goodness. This is the utopian. This is after you've trained yourself, after he spent 20 years in a cave training himself, or in the minaret, excuse me, training himself to worship Allah. But this is what we're trying to get to. And so it's going to require perseverance. And when you're doing the muhasaba, you're holding yourself to account, then you can see, okay, I'm missing my mark. I need to do more. Some other things you can do, you can set rewards for yourself. Tangible things. If I do my Quran, if I pray my witr for a week, then I'm going to buy some ice cream or buy myself a shirt, something practical. There are even like websites I believe that you can set up where if you don't do a certain thing, then you're like punished for it. So like you give charity to like horrible places. Or there are multiple ways, but you just have to become creative. Again, people use these type of things for worldly things. Why can't we use these same tools for our benefit for spiritual things? We just have to prioritize them. Examples of small things we can do to try to become better spiritually. Okay, there's more young people here than there are senior people. So I'll give you one that I did when I was 16. It was incredibly difficult. Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَكُلْ أُفًّا لَهُمْ. Don't even say uff to your parents. And uff in Arab culture language is quite equal to us huffing and puffing. So your mom or dad says do this, you're like, uff has like a harder meaning a little bit, but that's really what it comes from. They say do this, like, oh goodness. Don't even say that, let alone talking back, let alone being disobedient, let alone cursing, let alone treating bad. So what if we just said from today, I'm gonna try my best, whatever my parents ask me to do, I'm gonna have respect and try to do it. And this really applies to everyone. If your parents are alive, you can do that. If they're not, may Allah have mercy on them. But if your parents are alive, this is something we can do today. If our parents ask us to do something, we don't even say, oof. It's automatically, all right. Bite the bullet. Your mom's like, yo, take out the trash. It's like 12 degrees outside. You're like, yes. I will do it. Obviously, I'm not saying fall into oppression, but talk to, have conversation, but that changes the paradigm. If you're training yourself to never even say oof to your parents, then what will be the response when it's something easier? Or how will it be when something actually bad comes, and the conversation you have as to why you can't do it will be very, very different. Nothing else? I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to work for His sake and to be people that hold themselves into account. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the forbearance and the strength to continue to work hard for His sake. I ask Allah to make us a people who see the importance in struggling for both spiritual goals as well as our worldly goals. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a people who prioritize gaining spiritually just as much, if not more, than we do gaining worldly. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable our limbs to be in accordance to the things that He loves, so that our hearts will be in accordance to the things that He loves, so that we think about things that He loves, that we truly embody the meaning of being Muslim. I ask Allah to enable us to be people who submit to Him in all things, in all times, in all ways. Anything I said was correct was from myself and myself alone. Anything I said was incorrect was from myself and myself alone. Anything that was correct from Allah. وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفروه واتوبوا إليه وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه.